Hi, children of Millbank. I'm back with our book. It's Philip Pullman's The Adventure of the New Cut Gang, and the story in this one is Thunderbolt's Waxwork. Let's carry on with it. That's exactly what I was going to suggest, said Benny next day. That wasn't quite true. What Benny had already been going to suggest was that the gang set up their own waxwork museum to compete with the one in the New Cut. The vision of it was already shimmering in his mind like a gigantic soap bubble. An ornate entrance, queues a mile long, waxwork so real they just about sang and danced. A chamber of horrors that would freeze the blood of a ghoul. In Benny's mind, Kaminsky's Royal and National Waxworks expanded to fill a space roughly the size of the Crystal Palace, and it was such a success that they had to take it on a tour of America. And he came back as a millionaire, and before long he was Sir Benny, Lord Kaminsky, the Duke of Lambeth. Were there any princesses he could marry? But in the meantime, all they had was Thunderbolt's lump of petroleum wax, or dried jellyfish, or whatever it was. They were sitting in the loft over Hodgkin's livery stables, surrounded by straw and the rich smell of horse, and Thunderbolt was showing them the potential head of Dippy Hitchcock. I reckon it's beeswax, said Bridie. That ain't beeswax, said Benny. His father was a tailor, so he knew. Beeswax is hard and yellow. This is petroleum wax, no error. They make candles out of it, easy to carve and all. He was busy shaving bits off with his penknife. Eyes, he said. What we gonna do for eyes? Thunderbolt held out a faded, watery-looking blue marble. This is about the same colour as Dippy's, he said. What use is one? Said Bridie. Though I suppose he could be winking, or have a patch over it like Lord Nelson. I got a blood alley too, said Thunderbolt doubtfully, fishing out a large white marble with red streaks. That'll do, said Benny. You can have one good un, and the other can be bloodshot. We need something for his whiskers and all. Making the waxwork took the best part of a day. Benny hung around his father's workshop and borrowed a suit someone hadn't paid for. Bridie contributed a pair of her Uncle Mike's boots, and Thunderbolt managed to snip some hair off the tail of Jasper, the bad-tempered horse in the stable below. And while Bridie and Thunderbolt stuffed the suit with straw, stuck a broomstick through for a spine, and pummelled it all roughly Dippy-shaped, Benny set to work on the head. The wax was easy to carve. He excavated 2 holes for eyes and put the wax he'd dug out aside to make a nose with. Getting the eyes to look right took a long time, and still he wasn't sure it looked exactly like Dippy. Not exactly. But then it needed a nose after all. He reached for the wax he'd taken out and found it was gone. He knew where to look. Sharky Bob was licking his lips. It might be poison, Benny said hopefully. It's nice, said Sharky. I likes that. Benny sighed, dug a lump out of the back of the neck to make a nose with, and carried on. After an hour of squeezing the head and pulling it, or smoothing it and rubbing it and squinting at it through half-closed eyes, of trying to shove horsehair under its nose for a moustache and bits of broken china into its mouth for teeth, he reckoned it was done. There, he said proudly. The others clustered around. Said Bridie. He looks as if he's going to puke. Benny shut the mouth. At once the head took on the pursed-up expression of someone who's just swallowed a caterpillar. He's cross-eyed, said Thunderbolt. He looks as drunk as a fish. With a heavy sigh, Benny licked his finger and repositioned the dots of licorice that he'd stuck on the marbles for pupils. I'm still not sure about his gob box, said Bridie. Dippy's is always hanging open. With even heavier sigh, Benny prized the mouth open again. Now Dippy looked like an apprehensive patient about to undergo a new and untried form of dental surgery. That's better, said Thunderbolt. His eyes. I don't know. You do it then, said Benny passionately. You're so blooming clever, you show us how his eyes ought to go. Suppose you've been making eyes all your life? Suppose you're an expert on eyes? Suppose no one knows anything about eyes except you? I suppose people come from all over the world to ask you about eyes. Well, go on then. You make 'em look right, since you're the only one as knows how. He thrust the sticky head at Thunderbolt, who prodded and scraped and shoved for a minute or two. When he'd finished, the blue eye was gazing at the ceiling with the air of desperate appeal for help, while the red one leered at the floor like a murderer gloating over his victim. They all stood back and studied it critically. Well, said Bridie. It ain't got a body yet, has it? Said Benny impatiently. Shove it on the broomstick. Course it don't look right just sitting there like a head. Thunderbolt and Bridie waggled the head to and fro till it was well and truly jammed down on the broomstick. Ah, said Benny, and Bridie said, that's more like it. And Sharky Bob said, Caw! The others could only nod. It was a masterpiece. Thunderbolt had been carefully writing a label for it, with all the words spelled correctly, and now he pinned it to the dummy's coat, like a medal. Dippy Hitchcock, the celebrated hot chestnut man, and baked potatoes in season, public figure and philanthropist. What's the last word mean? Said Bridie. It means benefactor of mankind, said Thunderbolt. I found it in the dictionary. It's real all right. Come on then, said Benny. Let's get him to the museum. This was the part of the whole business they'd thought about least. At the back of everyone's mind had been the vague notion that they'd just walk in, set the wax Dippy in a prime position, and walk out again, without being seen. But they'd soon realised that it wasn't going to be that easy. In fact, the closer they got to the museum, the more they realised it wasn't going to be easy at all. For one thing, it cost money to go in, and there was only enough of Benny's shilling left for two of them. It'll have to be me and Bridie, said Benny. Sharky's too little, and Thunderbolt's too clumsy. It was true, and Thunderbolt had to admit it. So he and Sharky Bob stood across the road from the entrance of the museum. It was just getting dark. The first lamps were being lit, and the shop windows on either side of the waxworks glowed bright with their abundance of china plates and hardware, their red and green apothecaries' flasks and mahogany drawers of pills. The placard inside the museum window flickered dimly in the gruesome light shining on it. The proprietor, Professor Dupont, was too canny to put an actual waxwork there where people could see it free. Benny and Bridie, carrying the dummy between them with a fine display of casualness, as if it was the sort of thing that everyone took about as a matter of course, and they were surprised to see no one else carrying one, dodged across the road between the carts, the omnibuses, and ran up the steps to the museum entrance. There was a little window inside the door where you paid your threepence to the grim lady dressed in black. The tickets were a different colour each day, so you couldn't save yesterday's and go in with that. They sauntered in, with the dummy's feet bumping on the steps behind them, and an inquisitive dog sniffing in their wake. A second or two went by, and Benny and Bridie came out again in a hurry. In fact, they were running, and no sooner had they skidded to a halt and turned back indignantly than the dummy came hurtling out after them. Bridie caught it neatly and had to hold it up over the excited dog, while Benny shook his fist at the professor, who took one disdainful look and shut the door. Thunderbolt and Sharky Bob hadn't even had time to speak. Huh? Said Benny with a profound scorn. Seems to me he doesn't want his blooming waxworks to be successful. Seems to me he wants the same old boring kings and queens as every other waxworks. He's jealous. That's what he is. They didn't want to stay there for too long. People were beginning to make unfunny remarks about dummies and Guy Fawkes, and 3 or 4 dogs were leaping up and trying to kill it, so the gang trooped crossly back to the stable before going their different ways home. Thunderbolt was the last to leave. He was feeling fed up. His petroleum wax, and Benny had commandeered it to make the head, his idea in the first place, and he was too clumsy to take the dummy into the waxworks. Nothing was right, somehow. The cold dim light filtering in through the filthy skylight of the stable loft didn't help, and nor did that blooming dummy propped up against the wall. Now he looked at it properly. Thunderbolt thought that he'd never seen anything so horrible. With a shudder, Thunderbolt closed the trapdoor and climbed down into the stable, avoiding the teeth of old Jasper, to find the stable dog, Jezebel, whining and scratching at the bottom of the ladder. "What is it, Jez?" he said. Jezebel licked his hands with more than her usual friendliness and howled mournfully. Thunderbolt hurried home through the gathering evening, keeping an eye out for Crusher Watkins and the Lower Marsh gang. As he passed the market, he heard Mr. Ironhides, the costermonger, shout at a baffled customer, "Get out of it! Go on and pitch your snide somewhere else!" More fake sixpences, Thunderbolt thought. Then from nowhere, and for no reason at all, an idea came into his head. No, he couldn't even put it into words, but the idea wouldn't go away. Supposing it was Pa doing the coining? And once he'd said it to himself, it was easier to go on thinking it, though it made him feel hot and heavy, as if he was ill. Because things had been tight recently, the handy cheat, combined glove holder and dog whistle had been a failure, and Pa had put a lot into that, and no one seemed to want the self-adjusting pipe bowl cleaner, and all the easy snip smoker's companions had fallen apart because of a faulty hinge. And now Pa was busy at something he refused to talk about, even though he and Thunderbolt usually shared everything. By the time he got as far as that, Thunderbolt had stopped walking together. No, the idea was crazy. But yesterday, when he'd seen a newspaper article about the forged coins, Pa had folded the paper up hastily and sent him to bed. His Pa would never do anything criminal, but Uncle Sam had stolen the little brass Buddha on the mantel shelf from a hotel in Rangoon. At least he'd always claimed he had. And crime ran in families. Everyone knew that. His family weren't like that. But hadn't he, Thunderbolt, become a receiver of stolen property? He was a criminal himself. He came to, miserably, outside the butcher's and remembered what he was going to get for tea. In he went, scuffing up the sawdust, and waited while Mr. Graham, the butcher, parcelled up a leg of pork. "That's 1 6pence, my love, and a proper 6pence, if you please. None of these fancy ones. My neighbour got one of those in a change yesterday," said the customer. "Blooming wicked. How can poor folks live with rotten money going around? Why don't they forge gold sovereigns like what rich people use, eh?" When the customer had left, Thunderbolt said, "A twopenny pie, please." He paid for the pie. When it was wrapped, he said, "Are there lots of these snide coins about, Mr. Graham?" "They turn up all over the place, son. All over Lambeth. Anyway, and shillings and half-crowns, there must be a whole gang of smashers going round." Smashers were the people who actually passed fake coins in circulation. Thunderbolt's heart lifted. Pa wasn't part of a gang, that was certain. So one person on their own, they couldn't be doing it. One person could be making them, said Mr. Graham. Old Stamper Billings used to work on his own, and he kept going for years. Who? Stamper Billings. You remember him, Arthur? Said Mr. Graham to a thin old man who'd just come in. Old Stamper. Yeah, I remember him, wheezed the old man. He turned out all kinds of old Stamper. Course, they caught him in the end. The year Sefton won the Derby. He had a regular crew of smashers. They used to come down from the West End, Soho from east as far as Limehouse. That's where he was. Clever, see? He He never uttered them around here, so folks was less inclined to peach on him. There's always a nose nearby. You don't last long in that trade, but old Stamper lasts longer than most. Uttered means past, said Mr. Graham. That's the legal team for it. They got him for uttering. Haven't you taken any of the snide ones, Mr. Graham? Said Thunderbolt. Yeah, worse luck. Do you want 'em? They're no good to me. The butcher fished into the pocket of his apron and brought out 3 coins. Don't you try spending them now, he said. No, I don't want to spend them. I'm going to put them in my museum. Thunderbolt took the pie to the bakery to be heated. He could think of nothing but the forged coins, and when the pie was in the oven, he asked Mr. Solomons, the baker, if he'd taken any counterfeit coins. No, I'm too fly, said Mr. Solomons. Won't get any of them by me, you know that. What do they do to forgers when they catch them? They hang 'em, me boy. It's a capital crime. Defacing Her Majesty the Queen, making false coins is as bad as treason. Thunderbolt gulped. Oh. Do you know how they make fake coins, Mr. Solomon? The baker looked around, saw there was no one near, and leaned over the flowery wooden counter of the shop to speak confidentially. I heard, he said, from a cousin of mine who's a policeman, that they make a plaster of Paris mould off a real new coin and melt some cheap metal and pour it in. Then, to make it look like silver, they get a vat of spirits of salt and cyanide, because that's got silver in it, and dip the coins in that and pass an electric current through with a wire from a battery. That makes a bit of silver stick to the coin. There's craft in it, see? Thunderbolt could hardly hear. There was a kind of roaring in his ears. Those electric batteries in the cellar. That wire. He took the fragrant steaming pie when it was ready and hurried across the road towards home. Then he slowed down. He hurried again. He came to a halt. He didn't know whether to run or stand still. Finally, heavily, he dragged his steps in through the front door. There was a glow from the area window, like yesterday, and that sharp, faint smell. Was that the spirits of salt? What did they smell like? What were spirits of salt? Thunderbolt took the pie into the kitchen and lit the lamp. Then he thought, I must go and see what he's doing. He went out into the scullery at the back, where there was a dark little staircase that led down. And when he got to the bottom of the stairs, he heard voices. Pa was talking to someone. I should take him up west, he was saying. Try Oxford Street. Lambeth's no good anymore. Or you could try up Whitley's in Queensway. The other voice said something, and then the outer door closed. Then there was the sounds of tools being put away, and a swishing sound as his father swept the floor, whistling heartlessly. Thunderbolt crept up the stairs again, washed his hands under the pump in the yard, and splashed some water on his face too, in case his eyes were red. He stoked the range and put the pie on the table, but that was as far as he got towards making the tea, because just then, as his father came along the hall, there was a loud banging at the door. Thunderbolt's heart leapt with fear. He heard Pa's footsteps halt and then turn towards the door. He heard the handle turn. He heard a loud official voice say, Frederick William Dobney? Yes, that's me, said Pa mildly. Frederick William Dobney, I'm arresting you on the charge of... No! Thunderbolt flung the kitchen door open and hurled himself down the hall. There was a fat policeman at the door with a thin one beside him, and there was Pa, looking baffled. The thin policeman grabbed for Thunderbolt before he got to Pa and held him back. He was too strong. As hard as Thunderbolt struggled, he couldn't break free. Pa! Pa! He shouted, desperately, but the other policeman had the handcuffs on his father already, and Pa couldn't move. Let me talk to my boy, Pa was saying, but the fat policeman wouldn't, so Pa shouted, Let go! Let me talk to him! You can't take me away like this! What's he going to do? Sammy, don't... But Thunderbolt didn't hear any more, because the fat policeman was bundling Pa into a closed wagon and the driver was shaking the reins. Thunderbolt watched with helpless horror as the police wagon trundled away, taking his father with it. Then there came a great roaring Irish voice from behind, and the clatter of a dozen pairs of feet on the stairs. "What the devil are you holding the boy for, you wee faced beanstick? Let him go this minute. I'll take your helmet and ram it up your nose." Mrs. Malone bore down on the policeman like a force of nature. Lightning seemed to play around her head. The policeman took a deep breath to try and speak in his defence, and in the same moment Thunderbolt twisted out of his grasp and hurled himself down the steps into the road and away. Well, that's the end of chapter 2, guys. I hope you enjoyed the book. I'll see you all soon. Bye now.